a simple machine. But many people don't understand it, or they don't agree on how it works, and this has led to a lot of needless economic suffering. I feel a deep sense of responsibility to share my simple but practical economic pamphlet. Though it's unconventional, it has helped me to anticipate and to start sail for global financial crisis, and it has worked well for me in 30 years. Let's begin. The economy might seem complex. It works in a simple mechanical way. It's made up of a few simple parts and a lot of simple transactions that are repeated over and over and again zillion times. These transactions are bubbles driven by human nature, and they created the three main forces that drive the economy. Number one, productivity growth. Number two, short-term debt cycle. Number three, the long-term debt cycle. Well, look at these two forces and how laying them on the top of each other create a good template for tracking economic movements and figuring out what's happening now. Let's start with the simplest part of economy, transactions. An economy is simply the sum of the transactions that make it up. And a transaction is a very simple thing. You make a transaction all the time. Every time you buy something, you create a transaction. Each transaction consists of a buyer exchanging money or credit with a seller for goods, services, or financial assets. Credit spent just like money. So adding together the money spent and the amount of credit spent, you could know the total spending. The total amount of spending drives the economy. If you divide over the amount spent by the quantity sold, you get the price. And that's it. That's a transaction. It's a building block of economy machine. All cycles and all processes in economy are driven by transactions. So if we can understand transactions, we can understand the whole economy. A market consists of all the buyers or all the sellers, and making transactions is for the same thing. For example, there is a wheat market, a car market, a stock market, and markets for millions of things. An economy consists of all the transactions in all of its market. If it's added up to total spending and total quantity sold in all the market, that of everything you need to know to understand the economy. It's just that simple. People, business, banks, government are engaged in transactions the way I just got described, exchanging money and credit for goods, services, and financial assets. The biggest buyer and seller is government, which consisted of two important parties. A central government that collects taxes and spends money, and a central bank, which is different from the buyers and sellers because it controls the amount of money and credit in the economy. It does this by influencing interest rate and printing new money. For this reason, as well as the central bank is an important player in the flow of credit. I want to pay attention to credit. Credit is the most important part of our economy and probably the least understood. It's the most important part because it's the biggest and most volatile part. Just like buyers and sellers go to market to make market transactions, so do lenders and borrowers. Lenders usually want to make their money into more money, and borrowers usually want to buy something they can afford, like a house or a car. Or they want to invest in something like starting a business. Credit can help both lenders and borrowers get what they want. The borrowers promise to repay the amount they borrow called principal plus conditional amount called interest. When interest rates are high, there is less borrowing because it's expensive. When interest rates are low, borrowing increases because it's cheaper. When borrowers promise to repay and lenders believe them, credit is created. And if people can agree to credit out of thin air, that seems simple enough, but credit is tricky because it has different names. As soon as credit is created, it immediately turns into debt. Debt is both asset to the lender and liability to the borrower. In the future, when the borrower repays the loan plus interest, the asset and the liability disappear, and the transaction is settled. So why is credit so important? Because when a borrower receives credit, he is able to increase his spending. And remember, spending drives the economy. This is because one person's spending is another person's income. Think about it. Every dollar you spend, someone else earns, and every dollar you earn, someone else has spent. So when you spend more, someone else earns more. When someone's income rises, it makes a lender more willing to lend him money because who needs more worthy of credit. A credit-worthy borrower has two things: the ability to repay and collateral. Having a lot of income in relation to his debt gives him ability to repay. In the event that can repay, he has a borrower set to use a collateral that can be sold. This makes the lenders feel comfortable lending him money. So increases income allows increases borrowing, which allows increases spending. And since one person's spending is another person's income, this leads to more increases borrowing and so on. This therefore improving pattern leads to economic growth and is why we have cycles. In a transaction, you have to give something in order to get something, and how much you get depends on how much you produce. Over time, ruin and that accumulated knowledge raises our living standard. We call this productivity growth. Those who are inventive and hardworking raises their productivity and their living standard faster than those who are complacent and lazy. But that isn't necessarily true over the short run. Productivity matters most in the long run, but credit matters most in the short run. This is because productivity growth doesn't fluctuate that much, so it's not a big driver money of economic swings. That is because it allows us to consume more than we produce when we acquire it, and it forces us to consume less than we produce when we have to pay it back. Debt swings occur into big cycles. One takes about 5 or 8 years, and the other takes about 75 to 100 years. While most people feel swings that typically don't see the same cycles because they see them to across day by day, week by week. In this chapter, we are going to step by back and look at these three big processes and how they interact to make up our experience. And as mentioned, swings around the line are not due to how much innovation or hard work there is. They are primarily due to how much credit there is. Let's for a second imagine an economy without credit. In this economy, the only way I can increase my spending is to increase my income, which requires me to be more productive and do more work. Increases productivity is the only way for growth. Since my spending is another person's income, the economy grows every time my annual asset is more productive. If we follow the transactions and play this out, we see a progression like a productivity guru line. But because we borrow, we have cycle. This isn't due to any more regulation. It's to human nature and the way the credit works. Think of borrowing as simply a way of pulling spending forward. In order to buy something you can't afford, you need to spend more than you make. To do this, you essentially need to borrow from your future self. In doing so, you create a time in the future and need to spend less than make it in order to pay it back. It very quickly resembles a cycle. Basically, in tiny time you borrow, you create a cycle. This is true for an individual as it is for the economy. This is why understanding credit is so important because it sets in motion mechanical, predictable series of events that will happen in the future. This makes credit different from money. Money is what you settle transactions with. When you buy a beer from a bartender with cash, the transaction is settled immediately. But when you buy beer with credit, it's like starting a bartender. You're saying you promise to pay in the future. Together, you and the bartender create the asset and a liability. You just create the credit out of the thin air. It's not until you pay the bartender rather that the asset and the liability disappear. The debt goes away and the transaction is settled. The reality is that most of what people call money is actually credit. The total amount of credit in the United States is about $50 trillion, and the total amount of money is only about $3 trillion. Remember, in an economy without credit, The only way to increase your spending is to produce more. But in the economy with credit, you can also increase your spending by borrowing. As a result, an economy with credit has more spending and allows incomes to rise faster than productivity over the short run, but not over long run. Now, don't get me wrong, credit is necessary something bad that causes cycle. It's bad when finances over consumption that can't be paid back. Can be paid back. However, it's good when it efficiently allocates resources and produces income so you can pay back the debt. For example, if you borrow money to buy a big TV, if it doesn't generate incomes for you to pay back the debt. But if you borrow money to buy a tractor, and the tractor lets you harvest more crops and earn more money, then you can pay back your debt, improve your living standard. In an economy with credit, we can follow the transactions and see how credit creates the growth. Let me give you an example. Suppose you earn $100,000 a year and have no debt. You are creditworthy enough to borrow $10,000, say on a credit card. So you can spend $110,000 even though you only earn $180,000. Since your spending is another person's income, someone is earning $110,000. The person earning $110,000 with no debt can borrow $11,000. So he can spend $121,000 even though he has only earned $110,000. His spending is another person's income, and by following the transactions, we can begin to see how this process in a self-reinforcing pattern. But remember, borrowing created cycles, and if the cycle goes up, eventually it should come down. This leads into the short-term debt cycle. As economic activity increases with an expansion of the prosperity of the short-term debt cycle, spending continues to increase and prices start to rise. This happens because increases spending is fueled by credit, which can create instant out of thin air. When the amount of spending incomes grow faster than production of goods, prices rise. When prices rise, we call this inflation. The central bank doesn't want too much inflation because it causes problems. Seeing prices rise, it raises the interest rate. With higher interest rate, fewer people can afford to borrow money, and costs existing rise. Think about this in amount payments on your credit card going up. Because if people borrow less and have higher debt repayments, they have less money left to overspend. So spending slow. And since a person's spending is another person's income drop and so on and so forth. When people spend less, prices go down. We call this inflation. Economic activity decreases and we have a recession. If the recession becomes too severe, and inflation is no longer a problem, the central bank will lower interest rates to cause everything to pick up again. With low interest rates, the repayments are reduced and borrowing and spending pick up. And you see another expansion. And as you can see, the economy works like a machine. In short-term debt cycle, the spending is considered only the willingness of lenders and borrowers to provide and receive credit. When credit is easily available, there's an economic expansion. Right. This is available, there's a recession. And note that this cycle is controlled primarily by the central bank. The short-term debt cycle typically is 5 to 8 years and happens over and over again for decades. But notice that the bottom and the top of each cycle finish with more growth in the previous cycle and with more debt. Why? Because people foresee it. Then have an inclination borrow and spend more instead of paying back debt. It's human nature. Because of this, over long periods of time, debt rise faster than incomes, created the long-term debt cycle. Despite people becoming more embedded in lenders even more for extended credit. Why? Because everyone thinks things are going on great. People are just focused on what's been happening lately. And what's been happening lately? Income have been rising as the value of grain. stock market rules. It's a boom. We pay to buy goods, services, and finance financial assets. We borrow money. When people do a lot of that, we call it bubble. So even though debt have been growing, incomes have been growing nearly as fast or upside down. Let's call the ratio of debt to income the debt burden. So long as the income continues to rise, the debt burden stays manageable. At the same time, asset value is lower. People borrow huge amounts of money to buy asset investment, causing their prices to rise even higher. People feel wealthy. So even with the accumulation of a lot of debt, rising incomes offset that value, borrowers remain credit worthy for a long time. But this surely cannot continue forever, and it doesn't. Over decade debt burden slowly increases, creating larger and larger debt repayments. At some point, the repayments starting growing faster than incomes, forcing people to cut back on their spending. And since one person's spending is another person's income, incomes begin to go down, which makes people less creditworthy, causing borrowing to go down. Debt repayments continue to rise, which makes spending drop even further, and the cycle reverses itself. This is the long-term debt peak. Debt burden have simply become too big. For the United States, Europe, and much of the rest of the world, this happened in 2008. It happened for the same reason it had happened in Japan in 1989 and in the United States back in 1929. And now the economy begins deleveraging. The deleveraging, people cut spending, incomes fall, credit risks fail, asset prices drop, banks get squeezed, the stock markets crash. Social tensions rise and the whole thing starts a fear of itself the other way. As incomes fall and debt repayments rise, borrower gets squeezed. No longer creditworthy, credit drives up, and borrowers can no longer borrow enough money to make their repayment. Their repayments screaming to pierce the whole borrower's approaches to sell asset. The rush to sell asset forces the market at the same time as spending falls. This is when the stock market collapses. The real asset market tanks and banks get in trouble. As asset prices drop, the value of the collateral borrowers can put up drop. This makes borrowers even less creditworthy. People feel poor, credit rapidly disappears. Less spending, less income, less wealth, less credit, less borrowing, and so on. It's a vicious cycle. This feels similar to recession, but the difference here is that interest rate can be lowered to stay there, and a recession lowering interest rates works to stimulate borrowing. However, in a deleveraging, lowering interest rates doesn't work because interest rates are already low and soon hit 0%, so the stimulation ends. Interest rates in the United States hit 0% during the deleveraging of 1930 and again in 2008. The difference between a recession and a deleveraging is that in deleveraging borrowers, the debt burdens have simply gotten too big and can't be repaid by lowering interest rates. Lenders realize that debt have come to rise to able to fully pay back. Borrowers have lost their ability to repay and their collateral has lost value. They feel crippled by the debt. They don't even want more. Lenders stop lending, borrowers stop borrowing. Think of the economy as being not creditworthy, just like an individual. So what do you do about the leveraging? The problem is that burdens are too high and they must come down. There's four ways this can happen. 1. People, businesses, and government cut their spending. 2. Debt are reduced through default and restructuring. 3. Wealth is redistributed from the haves to have not. And finally, 4. The central bank print new money. These 4 ways have happened in every deleveraging in modern history. Usually, spending is cut first. As you just saw, people, business, and even government hike their debts and cut their spending so that they can pay down their debt. This is often referred to as austerity. When borrowers stop taking up new debt and starting paying down old debt, you might expect the debt burden to decrease. But the opposite happens because spending is cut, and mass spending is another mass income. It causes incomes to fall. Therefore, first the debt are repaid, and the debt burden actually gets worse. As we've seen, this cut spending is deflationary and painful. Businesses are forced to cut costs, which means less jobs and higher employment. This is led to the next step. They must be reduced. This must be reduced. Many borrowers find themselves don't pay their loans and borrowers stop and lenders upset. When a borrower does repay the bank, people get nervous and the bank won't be able to repay them. So they rush to withdraw their money from the bank. Banks get squeezed and paper businesses and banks default and their debt. This severe economic contraction is a depression. So their burden people spending on much more is really there. A big part of depression is people discovering much of their thoughts the world is really there. Let's go back to the bar. Let's do the bar. When you bought a beer and put in a bar tab, you promised to repay the bartender. Your promise became a set of the bartender. But if you break your promise, if you don't pay him back, essentially default on your bar tab, then the asset he has it's not really worth anything. It has basically disappeared. Many lenders don't work there. They are set to disappear and agree to debt restructuring. Debt restructuring means lenders get paid back less or get paid back over a longer time frame or a lower interest rate than most parties agree. Somehow, contract is broken in a way that reduces debt. Lenders would rather have a deal of something than all of nothing. Even though debt disappears, debt restructuring causes income and asset better to disappear faster. So the debt burden continues to get worse, like cutting spending. Debt reduction is so painful and deflationary. All of this impression. So the debt burden continues to get worse. Like cutting spending, debt reduction is also painful and deflationary. All of this impacts the central government because lower income and less employment means the government collects fewer taxes. At the same time, its needs increases its spending because employment has risen. Many of the employment have income. Needs increases its spending because employment has risen. Many of the employed have inadequate saving and need financial support from the government. Additional government created stimulus plans and increases their spending to make up for the decreases in the economy. Government budget deficits exploded, leverage because they spend more in earning taxes. This is what's happening when you hear about the budget deficits on the news. To fund their deficit, governments need to either raise its taxes or borrow money. But with incomes falling and so many employed, who is the money going to come from? The rich. So since government more money and since wealth is heavily concentrated in the hands of a small percentage of the people, government naturally raises taxes on the world, which facilitated redistribution of wealth in the economy, from the haves to the have-nots. But have-nots who are suffering begin to reason the wealthy haves. The wealthy haves being squeezed by the weak economy, falling asset prices and higher taxes, begin to reason to have-nots. If the difference continues, social disorder can break out. Not only the distinction within countries, we can countries. expensive colors. Okay. Excuse by American economy, falling asset prices, and higher through taxes begin to reason have not. If the depression continues, so sure disorder can break out. Not only do dissension rise within countries, they can rise between countries, especially better incredible countries. This situation can lead to political change that can sometimes be extreme. Prices of continuous squeeze by can falling assets and higher taxes begin to resent have not. If the depression continues, social suit can break out. Not only tension rise within countries, they can rise between countries, especially better incredible countries. This situation can lead to political change that can sometimes be extreme. In the 90s story, this reader Hitler coming to power war in Europe and depression in the United States. The phrase to do something to end the depression in crisis. Remember, most of what people thought was money was actually credit. So when credit is fierce, people don't have enough money. People are this fear of money, and remember who can print money? The central bank can. Having already lowered its interest rates to near zero, it's forced to print money. Unlike current spending, debt reduction, and world redistribution, printing money is inflationary and stimulus. In whether the central bank prints new money out of thin air and uses it to buy financial assets and government bonds. It happened in the United States during the Great Depression, and again in 2008 when the United States Central Bank and Federal Reserve printed over $2 trillion. Other central banks around the world that could print a lot of money too. By buying financial assets with this money, it helps drive up asset prices, which makes people more creditworthy. However, this only helps those who own financial assets. You see, the central bank can print money, but it can only buy financial assets. The central government, on the other hand, can buy goods and services and put money in the hands of the people, but it can't print money. So, in the order to stimulate the economy to most cooperate by buying government bonds, the central bank essentially lends money to government, allowing it to run this deficit and increases spending on goods and services through its stimulus programs and unemployment benefits. This increases people's income as well as the government's debt. However, it will lower the economy total debt burden. This is a very risky time. Policymakers need to balance the poor ways the debt burdens come down. The deflationary wave to need balance with the inflationary waves the order to maintain stability. If balanced correctly, there can be beautiful deleveraging. You see, the deleveraging can be ugly or it can be beautiful. How can I deleveraging be beautiful? Even though deleveraging is a difficult situation, handling a difficult situation in best possible way is beautiful, a lot more beautiful, and that pure the balance exists at the leveraging paces and a beautiful leveraging depth this kind relative to income. Real growth in fast when inflation is the problem. It is achieved by having the right balance. The right balance requires a certain mix of cutting spending, reducing debt, transferring wealth, and printing money so that economy and social stability can be maintained. People escape printing money will raise in inflation. It will offset foreign credit. Remember, spending is what matters. A dollar of spending paid for the money has the same effect on prices as a dollar of spending paid for with credit. By printing money, the central bank can make up for the disappearance of credit with an increase in the amount of money. In order to run things around, the central bank needs to not only pump up income growth, but get the rate of income growing higher than the rate of interest on the accumulated debt. So what do So what do I mean by that? Basically, income needs to grow past debt growth. For example, let's assume the country going to the leveraging has a debt to income ratio 100%. That means the amount of debt has is the same as the amount of income the country makes in a year. Now think about the interest rate of the debt. Let's say it's 2%. And that is going to 2% because of the interest rate, and incomes is one around 1%. You will reduce the debt burden. You need to print enough money to get the rate of income grow above the rate of interest. However, printing money could easily reduce the cost because it's easy to prefer to the alternatives. However, printing money could easily be abused because it's so easy to and people prefer it to the ultra. However, printing money could easily be abused because it's so easy to do and people prefer into the alternative. The key is to avoid printing too much money costs and causing unacceptably high inflation the way Germany did during into the leveraging the 1920. And policymakers achieved the right balance. The leveraging is so dramatic. Growth is slow, but debt burdens go down. That's a beautiful leveraging. When incomes begin to rise, borrowers begin to appear more creditworthy. And when borrowers appear more creditworthy, lenders begin to lend money again. Debt burdens finally begin to fall. Able to borrow money, people can be spent more. Eventually, the economy begins to grow again, leading to the reflationary period of the long-term debt cycle. The leveraging process can be horrible if handled badly. If handled well, it eventually fixes the problem. It takes roughly a decade or more for debt burdens of foreign economic activity to get back to normal plans to the last decade. In closing, of course, the economy is a little bit more complicated than this template suggests. However, laying the short-term debt cycle on top of the long-term debt cycle and then laying the top of productivity growth line gives a reasonably good template for seeing where we've been, where we are now, or where we're probably headed. So, in summary, there are three rules that I'd like you to take away from this. First, don't have the rise the past of the income because your debt burdens will eventually cost you. Second, don't have income rises faster than productivity because you eventually become uncomfortable. Don't have debt rise faster than income because your debt burdens will eventually crush you. Second, don't income rise faster than productivity because you eventually become uncomfortable. And third, you do all that you can raise your productivity because in the long run, that's what matters most. This is simple advice for you and it's simple advice for policymaker. You might be surprised, but most people, including most policymakers, don't pay enough attention to this. This template has worked for me and I hope it will work for you. Thank you.